Chodesh Tov. Today's daf is daf Samach Tes, and the last thing, yeah, the last thing that we discussed was something called Nevela Haruya Leger, Kruya Nevela. We had a drasha from which we derived the conclusion that the Torah prohibits something which is Ru'uya Leger, which means it's edible. And in the case of a mixture in which something is no saint tam lifgam, since it gives a detrimental taste to this tarovis, therefore it's mutter because it's not re'uya leger. Now the Gemara wants to know, what about Rabbi Meir? Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that even in a case of no saint tam livgam, it's asur. So what's he going to do with the pasuk of the drush of nevela haru'uya leger? Rabbi Meir, hahu lemeute srucha meikara. According to Rabbi Meir, we're talking about something that was putrid from its inception. And therefore, the Torah says it's ein aruya leger, and it's not prohibited. However, if you have something that was in and of itself ru'uya leger, and then it falls into a tarovis and it's pogem, and it makes the tarovis detrimental, in that case, Rabbi Meir says it's asur. And the Bar Plukta, who disagrees with Rabbi Meir's Rabbi Shimon, why doesn't he need the pasuk of the drush of Nevela Ri Leger for Srucha Meikara? And the answer is because Srucha Meikara lo tzorech mi'uta. We don't need to exclude a case of something that was putrid from its very inception, because Afra di bialmahu. It's not an edible, and therefore the Torah doesn't prohibit it. The Torah only prohibits something that's edible. But if it's afar, if it's like the dust on the earth, then the Torah doesn't have to tell you don't eat dust. All that the Torah tells you not to eat, as we had in this week's parasha, Parashas Re'eh, is only that which is edible. So therefore, if the pasuk is coming to exclude something, it cannot be coming to exclude srucha meikara, which al pi svara is not ru'uya lachila, and therefore it doesn't need a miyud, it's afra bialma, but rather it comes to exclude the case of a mixture where the additional iser that falls into heter is pogem the tam. Omar Ula, machlokes shishbiach ulubasof pogam. Aval pogam meikara divrei hakol mutter. Ula has a new chiddush on Rabbi Meir. We assume that Rabbi Meir would hold that even something which, when it falls into the tarovis, that iser that fell in, is giving a tam pogum, that's when it's asur. And now comes along Ula and he says, no, that's not true. Even Rabbi Meir agrees that if when the iser fell into this mixture, it was pogum, it's mutter, even according to Rabbi Meir. The entire machlokas, the controversy between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon, according to Ula, revolves around the case where meikara, when it first fell into the taroves, it was nosein tam l'shvach. It actually enhanced the taste of the mixture. But l'basof pogam, later on, with the passage of time, it impaired and made a detrimental impact on the mixture. So that according to Rabbi Meir, once it was registered as nosein tam l'shvach at stage T1, then it's asur, and you can't be mafki, you can't undermine that iser once it's chal. Whereas Rabbi Shimon is of the opinion that even though at time T1 it was nosein tam l'shvach, now it's no longer nosein tam l'shvach, but rather it's nosein tam l'fgam. Like, for example, we had the case, if you happen to recall from yesterday, of vinegar that was asur. It had a din of yayin nesach, and it fell into cold beans. And vinegar on cold beans enhances the taste of cold beans. But then he went ahead and he heated it up. And once the beans become hot, the vinegar has a detrimental effect on them. So the positive effect and impact of vinegar on beans is only when they're cold beans. But once he heated them up, they became pogem. So Meir says, look, once you poured the vinegar onto the cold beans, it became aser, then the fact that you heated it up later cannot be mafkia, cannot undermine and neutralize that iser once it was chal. Whereas Reb Shimon holds, let's look at it as it is today, and right now he heated it up. As a result of heating it up, the vinegar has a detrimental impact on these beans, and therefore it's mutter. Esvei Rav Chaga le'ula. I never heard the name of Chaga. Maybe it's an offshoot of the name Chagai, one of the Nevi'im. In any event, Ula is not going to be happy with the kasha that Rav Chaga raises on him, against him. And Rav Chaga quotes a brayso: Yayin shenafel esoch adoshim, v'chomet shenafel etoch grisim, or asur Rabbi Shimon matir. So what happens in a combination between wine and lentils, or vinegar, that's yayin nesech, that fell into split beans? Now, the Tanakama here that we identify with Rabbi Meir says it's asur. And it would seem that it's asur because immediately when the yayin falls onto the lentils or the chometz falls onto the grisim, it's pogem. Now, according to Ula, if it's pogem immediately, then divrei hakol mutter. Even Rabbi Meir would be matir. And yet, this brayso records the Tanakama saying that it's also Rav Shem matir. If it's a pagam eikara situation, there cannot be no a machlokas according to Ula, because even Rabbi Meir would be modeh that it's mutter upligi, and yet the brayso records a machlokas, and therefore this is an objection against Ula, because Ula said that even Rab Meir concedes that if it was pogum eikara, it's mutter. And here the brayso talks about a case of pogum eikara, and yet quotes the Tanakama, who is Rabbi Meir, as holding that it's also Omar Ula. Ula responds to this kasha of Chaga, and he says, Chaga lo meida yoda maika rabbanan. Basically, you don't know what the rabbis are saying over here. You're way off here in your interpretation of the brayso. Tiyuvta kamosiv, you ask me a kasha? You don't even understand the brayso, and you're raising it as an objection to my shita. Hakav, what is the brayso talking about? Kigon shenafel tok grisim tsonenim. The brayso is referring to a scenario in which the vinegar, that's yayin nesech, fell onto cold split beans. And we said that if it's on cold split beans, then it's a tam l'shvach. It's only later on when he heats them up, it becomes a tam l'fgam. Is nasa kemishesh biachal b'sof pagam. So this case is equal to a case of where stage one it was no say tam l'shvach and enhanced the taste, and only later on, let's say when he heated it up, then it impaired the taste, and it was pogem v'yoser. And that's why Rabbi Meir, the Tanakama, says it's asur, because at the beginning, stage one, it was mashbiach because it fell on cold beans. So Ad Kan Ula now steps up to the plate, Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan Omar b'pogim eikar machlokes. No, Rabbi Meir went as far as to say that even if it was pogem from the very moment that it fell into the taroves, it's asur. Now, one thing about Rabbi Yochanan is clear, but another thing about Rabbi Yochanan is not clear at all. What's clear, according to Rabbi Yochanan, is that Rabbi Meir goes as far as to be oser and rule an iser, even in a case of hoge meikara. However, what's unclear in Rabbi Yochanan is, what about the case of Hishbiach Ulabasof Hagam? According to Rabbi Meir, there's no question, because if a Meir generates an Isur, even in the case of Pagam Meikara, how much more so if it was Mashbiach Meikara? But when it comes to Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yochanan's statement is unclear. And that's what the Gemara is going to point out now. Iboilahu. I don't get it. Is Rabbi Yochanan implying that the reason why Rabbi Shimon rejects Rabbi Meir is only because it was Poge Meikara? But if it was Mashbiach Meikara, we said the Svara is a very powerful Svara, that once it's Mashbiach, it becomes Asur, and you can't be matter it later on when you cook it and heat it and make it Pogan. So therefore, Shbiach Lebasof Pogam is, even Rabbi Shimon would confess that it's Asur. Or Dilma, or maybe Rabbi Yochanan meant to say that even in the case of Poge Meikara, Rabbi Meir asers it. And therefore we have a twofold machlokas now between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon. Bein bazu machlokas. And Rabbi Shimon goes as far as to say that even if at the first stage it was mashbiach, but now today it is poging because he went ahead and he cooked it, and because of the detrimental impact that it has today, it's mutter. The Gemara leaves it as an unanswered question. Amar Rav Amram, Efshar Isa lahad Rav Yochanan Lotanu leva masnisin. I don't get it. According to Rav Yochanan, as opposed to Ula, Rabbi Meir prohibits even in a case of Meikara Pagam. How could it be that the great Rabbi Meir, according to Rabbi Yochanan's interpretation, held that if it's Poge Meikara, it's Asur, and we find no source for this in the Mishnah? Could the Mishnah have completely omitted it? And the answer is going to be that you, Rav Amra, missed up on a Mishnah in Masechta Orla. Had you known about the Mishnah Masechta Orla, you would have come to the conclusion that the Mishnah records Rabbi Meir's shita of Pagam Meikara Asur. Nofak Dak V'Ashkam. Now, Nofak Dak means that Rabbi Amram, who asked the question, he himself went out and he studied and he investigated and he didn't leave any leaf unturned until he found a Mishnah that's the source for Rabbi Meir's Chumrah of Pagam Meikara Asur. The Snan, the Mishnah says in Orla. Okay, now to understand the Mishnah in Orla, we have to know that there's something called Sa'ar. And really, if you want to learn more about Sa'ar, you have to learn either Masechta Psachim with regard to Chimutz, or you have to learn Masechta Menachos, where the Torah says you can't bring a mincha that's Chometz. Anyway, there's something called Sa'ar. Sa'ar is a chemical agent of leavening. It causes the dough to rise. Now, the reason why that's very significant for us is because, as opposed to every other case of taroves, where the Isur is batel and it loses its identity, it's very difficult to say that CR should be batel, because it really gives something into the dough that maintains the dough. It's a leavening agent. So an Isur which continues to maintain its identity is very difficult to subject to bittul. Let's leave that comment on the side, but keep it in mind. So now what happens is that at stage one, there was a process of chimutz. You put a leavening agent, which is called CR, into a mixture, into a dough. And right now, if you just wait a few minutes, the dough is going to be machmitz. It's going to become leavened. But he didn't wait those few minutes. Siar shalchun shenaflu toch ha'isa v'yesh bo kedei lahachmitz v'echmitz. Had he left things alone, there was enough siar that fell into this mixture, into this dough, that would have caused the dough to rise, to leaven. But then what did he do? Akach nafal, he pushed over, or it fell by the wind, sa'ar shel truma, which again is asur lezarin. It's only mutter to kohen. O si'ar shel klai hakeret, which is isurei hanoah for everybody. V'yesh bo kedei lahachmitz, and the volume of sa'ar shel isa, shel isur, whether it be si'ar shel truma, whether it be si'ar shel klai hakerem, that volume in and of itself was enough to cause the leavening to the dough. So he's basically doubling up on the process of leavening. He's got one si'ar of chulin that already created chimutz. He now adds a sa'ar of isur, and that itself could have created chimutz. Is the Tanna Kama says it's osur, which means that the Tanna Kama is maintaining that yesh chimutz achar chimutz, meaning even though the leavening process has been clinched, has been achieved, there's something beyond that in which it overdoses on leavening. It's a double leavening process. And that has a detrimental impact on the dough. But nevertheless, since the Isur fell into the heter, and the Isur was Si'ar, and that Si'ar was either Truma, or alternatively was Klai HaKerem, comes along the Rabbanan, which is Rabbi Meir, and said, Asur. Wait a second, what do you mean Asur? The very moment that that second leaven, that second CR fell into the dough, it had a detrimental impact on the dough. You've overdosed on leavening. It's a super leavening that is detrimental. And this will be a source for Rabbi Yochanan's interpretation of Rabbi Meir, that Rabbi Meir asers even in a case of Pogei Meikar. And of course, Reb Shimon is matir. Frekte Gemara v'ahacha de pgam meikarahu upligi. You see that Rabbi Meir is machmir, even though it was pogei meikara, the very moment that the second leaven fell in and caused an extra leavening, which is detrimental. It's asur. So don't tell me, Rav Amra, that there's no source in the Mishnah for Rabbi Meir's shita, the way Rabbi Yochanan formulated it, that even in a case of Pogei Meikar, it's asur. Rab Zera says, no. Listen, Rav Amram, I know that you're it's very valiant and, very worthy of praise that you're looking for a source for Rabbi Yochanan in the sheet of Rabbi Meir, but you did not successfully find one in the Mishnah in Arla. Because Shani Isa, although you're right in your premise that the dough that now has the second leavening agent falling into it is going to be overdosed on leavening, and it has a detrimental effect on the dough. But in the overall picture, there's something very positive over here. There's the shvach. It's a really good idea to add the seconding leavening. Why? Because that creates more sa'ar. And that's called Ru'uya Lachamitz Bahem Isos Acheros, meaning that the sa'ar is now a powerful chemical substance that can be used to cause leavening in other doughs. So that's called Nosing Tam L'Shvach. And the poskim learn from this that if there are two impacts of the Isa that fell into the heter, one is detrimental here because it creates a tam lifgam, but on the other hand, it's positive because he can now create something extra that he didn't have before, namely in this case, Ru'uyas Lachamis Ben Mitzvahs Isos Acheros, then it's considered no same tam lishva. Toshma, can we find a proof and a source amongst Tanoim? In this case, we're going to have a brisa to support Rabbi Yochanan's interpretation of Rabbi Meir that afilu poge meikara is asur, because now the brisa says si'ar shel truma v'shalchun shenaflu socha isa bazeh kedei lahachmitzu bazeh kedei lahachmitz v'huchmitzu. Now take a look at what happened. It's not like the case before that we had in the Mishnah in Orla, where first the chulin fell in, the si'ar shel chulin, and then the si'ar shel klaya keren fell in. No, both si'ars fell in simultaneously. Shel truma v'shel chulin, and they both fell into the dough. And what is the brisa paskin? Well, guess what? The brisa is going to record a machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rav Shimon. And the chimtzu also, let's understand the logic of Rabbi Meir, because bazeh kedei lahachmitz bazeh kedei lahachmitz. We have what we call in modern Hebrew, if you're familiar with the term, a shituf pe'ula, when you have two partners that are accomplishing a goal together in tandem. So we have the si'ar shel chulin, we have the si'ar shel truma, and they work in tandem to create chimutz. So the leavening of the dough is a result not only of the si'ar shel chulin, but also of the si'ar shel truma. And since the si'ar shel truma creates leavening, that's called a tam lishvach. But even though, again, when you add the two together, then you get a tam lifgam, because it's, like we said, overdosed. Rabbi Shimon Matir. Nafal shel truma tchila. Now the Bryce has a seifa in which the si'ar shel truma fell into the dough first, then tivrei hakol. Also, even Rabbi Shimon would have to be modeh that it became asur because it was a no sein tam l'shvach. It caused the normal leavening of the dough, and if subsequently nafal shel chulin, it would make no difference, because even though it would now become no sein tam l'fgam, but it doesn't matter. It was mikara l'shvach. Nafal shel chulin v'akach nafal shel truma shel klai. And what about in the reverse situation, where the chulin fell in first, which means that the dough reached its state of leavening through the heter of si'ar shel chulin. V'achar kach, and afterwards nafal shel truma o shel klai kerem asur v'Rabbi Shimon Matir. V'hacha v'pagam eikara upligi. The Gemara is going to prove that the original dechia that we had before, namely Re'uya Lechamea Bo Kama Isos Acheros, that doesn't apply in this case. And therefore in the Brisa, which records a machlokas between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim about a case of Pagam Meikaro, because as soon as the Truma fell in to this taroves, it created an overdose of leavening, and that's called a detrimental taste. And if you try to pull it off, and you want to give me the old dechia, the old answer, and reject it by saying that here too, we're talking about a situation in which you've done a tam l'shvach because now you've created more si'ar. Hara'uya l'chamea bo kama Isos,